This video will be discussing the drug and alcohol testing program mandated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the Department of Transportation. So understanding what your role is important when it comes to drug testing for FMCSA purposes. The motor carrier's role is to make sure that it has a robust enough program to administer drug testing both randomly, pre-employment, post-accident, in a way that is efficient enough to keep the public safe. Who must be tested? All CDL drivers operating a commercial motor vehicle greater than 26,000 GVWR on public roadways must be DOT drug and alcohol tested. This applies to any driver required to possess a CDL, including those employed by federal, state, and local government agencies, owner-operators, and equivalently licensed drivers from foreign countries. Part-time drivers must also be included in an employer's drug and alcohol testing program. Drivers who only operate CMVs on private property, not open to the public, do not require testing. What does a DOT drug screen test for? The 5-panel testing includes marijuana, cocaine, opioids, opium and codeine derivatives, amphetamines and methamphetamines, and PCP. With marijuana, this includes however you ingest it, smoking it, eating it. Even if you have a product with THC in it, it can show up on a DOT drug screen. Opioid examples include codeine, fentanyl, hydrocodone, methadone, morphine, oxycodone, just to name a few. And codeine you can get over-the-counter medicine in other countries, not here in the United States, but it's sold over-the-counter. So it's important to see what your cough medicine contains or any medicine your doctor is giving you. Amphetamines would include things like Adderall, which is an ADHD medicine, dexedrine, methamphetamine, or ecstasy, to name a few. Prescription drugs is something I get asked a lot about. What if I have a prescription to take it? The prescription is fine. It means it's not illegal for you to take it. However, your ability to drive a truck, if it's impaired by what you're taking, you cannot take it. Your doctor should be made aware that you're a CDL driver and that you drive a semi-truck for a living, so he knows what you can and can't take while being on the road. What about over-the-counter medicine? Well, over-the-counter medicine can be just as dangerous as prescription medicine, so it's important to know what the ingredients are and if it is something you shouldn't be taking. A good method to help determine that is to look, does it have side effects that might make you drowsy? If it does, that's a good sign that you probably shouldn't be taking it while driving a truck. One of the big changes in recent years is you're seeing more and more states legalize marijuana. Illinois is included in that list of states that has legalized marijuana. However, you're still prohibited from taking it as a truck driver. It will show up on a drug screen and you will become disqualified from driving if you are. You will also see some products that say things like THC free. There are many lawsuits currently right now with truck drivers who are suing companies that sold things saying they are THC free, but then they still failed a DOT drug or alcohol test. So my advice to you is avoid anything that has THC or hemp-like products in it while you are a truck driver. Something else to consider in an environment where so many drugs have become legal so quickly is avoid foods that are given to you at a party or by people you don't know. That will not be a valid excuse for failing a drug or alcohol test. Things like brownies and candies now can have drugs in them. Sometimes after someone fails a drug test, they try to give a million excuses as to why it occurred. Wasn't their fault, it accidentally happened at a party. There are all sorts of reasons. The fact is, we do not, as a company, make the determination whether we can change your drug test results. You're pretty much wasting your time with excuses. The best thing to do is be aware and be careful, because at the end of the day, it will be the drug testing company administering the drug test that determines whether you can remain as a truck driver, and there pretty much will be no excuse that will be good enough. Refusal to perform a drug and alcohol test is treated the same as a failed test. It has the same repercussions, which is that you'll have to do a drug rehabilitation program and eventually a return to duty test in order to drive the truck again. So refusing to do a test can fall under several circumstances. It can be where you know there's something in your system so you don't show up at the drug place as directed. It could be that you think it's inconvenient and unfair that you're being drug tested. The sad reality is if you don't go take that drug test as soon as possible, you will be a refusal to test and it will affect your career as a truck driver. One of the questions that get asked is, can you be sent for a drug or alcohol test at any time? And the answer is a little complicated. For a drug test, certainly within a day of having driven the truck, you could be sent for a drug test because you should be prepared at any time to be able to pass a drug test. With an alcohol test, it has to be right before or right after you've finished a safety-sensitive function like driving the truck. So you might get sent for an alcohol test right before starting work or right at the end of the day. Our policy is to try to send a driver for either a drug or alcohol test at the time that they've been driving the truck or planned on driving the truck. We certainly wouldn't call you from a party on New Year's Eve to go do an alcohol test. That simply wouldn't be fair. During pre-employment, you're going to be asked to sign a lot of consent forms, some of them dealing with drug and alcohol. One of these consent forms gives us permission to ask your previous employment about your drug and alcohol testing history. You will also sign something that allows us to query you on the FMCSA clearinghouse. You should have your own login created for that site. You simply go to this site if you haven't done it yet, and you create a login by putting in your information. Once you've done that, it will allow us to query the clearinghouse to see if you have any prior drug and alcohol violations. You must then give consent through the site to allow us to look further. This is what's called a full query. In addition, you'll fill out paperwork allowing us to do what's called a partial query at least once a year, where we will query all drivers who are driving for us. And that partial query is consented to by signing the sheet about partial consent forms. In the event that anything comes back from FMCSA, it would require us to do a full query of you, and again, you'd have to give your electronic consent. So long term, it is definitely worth signing up, even if you're not planning to make a change in your employment current with whoever you're driving with. This database contains any drug and alcohol violations that have occurred, and any future ones that will occur will go into the clearinghouse, warning other employers when you do fail a drug or alcohol test so that you must do a return to duty test. The first type of drug test that you'll take in any company is a pre-employment drug test. That occurs with every motor carrier and is a requirement that is met where you've taken the test and the motor carrier has received the results indicating a negative drug test that you did pass the drug test before allowing you to perform any safety-sensitive function. What they mean by safety-sensitive function is anything that involves driving the motor vehicle in use for the company. The next type of test we're going to talk about is the random drug and alcohol testing. How this works, every motor carrier must test 50% of all of their eligible drivers for drugs at least once a year, and alcohol falls into the 10% category. It's important to note if that were 100 drivers, that means there would be 50 drug tests, and for alcohol, because of 10%, 10 alcohol tests. However, it doesn't mean 50 different people will be tested. How it works is it's broken up quarterly. So over the course of a quarter, you will test 1/4 of 50% of the drivers. However, they are randomly drawn, and they are not drawn by us, the motor carrier, at least not how we do it. We allow the drug testing facility to randomly choose, using a scientific method, the drivers who will be chosen each time. So you could potentially get 4 drug tests in the same year or 4 alcohol tests. Odds are you won't, but you could be chosen 4 times. In the case of a random test, you'll be completely unaware that you've been chosen, and over the course of one of the quarters, you'll be called on one single day and be told to go take a drug and or alcohol test. You will have to go immediately. It is not an option. It is something where it's supposed to be random, so you're unaware that it's coming. An excuse of being tired or unable to go because you have prior obligations, we're only going to ask you on days that you're working, either before or just after work, and it is an obligation by us to make sure that it is completely random and you're unaware of it. We also limit the number of personnel inside the trucking company who are aware as per the regulations. Refusal to comply with a notice to go do a random drug or alcohol test is the same as a failed test. The third type of test we're going to talk about is a reasonable suspicion test. A reasonable suspicion test requires one of the DOT-trained supervisors to direct a driver to be drug or alcohol tested whenever he or she exhibits signs of drug or alcohol abuse. The decision must be based on observations concerning the appearance, behavior, speech, or body odors of the driver. It is not where a supervisor or an employee of the company can simply decide his decision is erratic, I must go send him for a drug or alcohol test. It must be based on several factors, and it does become documented. Much like every other type of drug and alcohol test, it is not optional. You are required to go and go right away if it is determined that you need to take a drug and or alcohol test. If they do believe you're under drugs and alcohol, there is a good chance someone in the company will drive you to the test out of fear of you driving a car. Probably the most important type of drug and alcohol test to understand is post-accident drug and alcohol testing. In any accident, it does not necessarily mean that you need a post-accident drug and alcohol test. It's only under specific circumstances. So let's talk about what those circumstances are. The first is a fatality. Anytime there's a fatality, whether you're stopped at a red light and a car drives into you, it has nothing to do with fault. All it has to do with is someone died at the scene. If that occurs, you need a post-accident drug and alcohol test. Fault has nothing to do with it. The second instance where you need a post-accident drug and alcohol test is if someone is taken away in an ambulance and you get a ticket. Not just taken away in an ambulance, it requires you getting a ticket as well. The third time where you'll need it is in the case of a tow and a ticket. So, fatality, no ticket, test. Ambulance plus ticket, test. Ambulance and no ticket, no test. Ticket, no ambulance, no test. Tow plus ticket, get a test. Tow and no ticket, no test. I hope that sort of clarifies that because that's one of the more important. Now let's say you're in an accident, but you'd like to get a drug test just because you want to use it in case of a lawsuit. That's okay, but it cannot be done under the motor carrier. You must just get your own test and tell them it's not for the trucking company. It's for your own personal record and use. Doing a test when you're not required to is just as bad as not doing a test when you were supposed to. Now, in the event that a vehicle is not towed but does have disabling damage, that is still considered being towed. So, for instance, if a car door was missing, it is no longer a legal to drive vehicle. In those instances, it is considered the vehicle's towed, even if it's not towed from the scene. The best practice you can have as a driver is to report whenever you're involved in an accident and give as much information as possible. If a member of the safety team is available, they are the best person to talk to. The final type of drug testing we're going to talk about today is called the return to duty test. In order to understand the return to duty test, let's talk first about what happens if you fail or refuse to take a test. What happens is you're going to be, in order to return to driving a truck in the future, you'll have to see what's called a substance abuse professional. That substance abuse professional will determine the best course of action for you to work out a plan of rehab in order to get you off drugs or alcohol, depending on what you had failed for. In most cases, the SAP will require you to visit with them for several months, sometimes up to a year or longer, in order to complete the rehab program. And then you do what's called a return to duty test. The return to duty test is another drug and alcohol test. However, it's important to note that after you've seen the substance abuse professional and you return to driving in some fashion with a motor carrier, you're going to be subject to a greater number of random tests than the pool itself provides. Those random tests are usually somewhere between 1 to every 2 months over the course of the following year as a truck driver. Also, many trucking companies, including ours, will not hire you if you've had a failed drug or alcohol test.